The red and blue lights danced across my driveway, flickering through the night as two squad cars rolled to a stop in front of my home. From the living room window, I saw my 16-year-old daughter, Madison, frozen on the porch. Her overnight bags were still clutched tightly in her trembling hands. Two officers were approaching her cautiously, their palms hovering over their duty belts. It was a terrifying sight for any parent to witness from afar. And there, standing at the edge of my property with her arms crossed and an infuriatingly smug grin, was Linda Carmichael. She was the self-proclaimed queen of Pine Valley Estates, acting as if she owned the entire street. What Linda didn't know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her nosy, power-drunk life. Let me back up a bit and explain exactly how this completely absurd and frustrating situation came to be in the first place. My name is Thomas Whitmore, and I've served as a circuit court judge here in Montgomery County for the past 12 years. After my divorce 3 years ago, Madison began splitting her time between households. She alternated between my house in Pine Valley and her mother's place across town. 'Twas a smooth arrangement, at least for everyone except Linda Carmichael, our ever-watchful and increasingly paranoid HOA president. Linda seemed to treat every guest like an invader trespassing on sacred land. She had ruled over Pine Valley for 5 years, turning what should have been a simple homeowners association into her own personal dictatorship. She memorized every bylaw, enforced every rule with a fanatic's zeal, and took visible joy in catching residents in even the smallest violations. Trash cans, visible after 6 p.m. That was an automatic $50 fine. Grass half an inch too tall. Another citation. Ups. She once fined a neighbor $200 for leaving. Christmas lights up until January 3rd. But her absolute favorite obsession was policing who came and went from the neighborhood. Linda fancied herself a suburban security guard. She lurked by the gates, questioned delivery drivers, tailed unfamiliar cars, and even snapped photos like some low-budget detective on a neighborhood patrol. Most of us ignored her antics, figuring it wasn't worth the energy to confront her. That all changed the day she set her sights on my daughter. Madison had just arrived for her routine weekend visit. Her mom dropped her off at the gate like usual, and she walked the short 2 blocks to my house. It was a routine she had done dozens of times. I was in my home office reviewing Monday's case files. Suddenly, I heard something unusual outside. At first, I thought it was kids playing, until I caught the sharp crackle of police radios. Panic set in, and I immediately rushed straight to the front door. There stood Madison, surrounded by 2 officers. Tears were streaking down her cheeks as she desperately tried to explain that she lived here and that I was her father. But Linda simply wouldn't let her speak. Linda's shrill, self-righteous voice cut through the air like nails on a chalkboard. I saw her sneaking around the back of the house. Linda yelled, waving her hands dramatically. She was clearly casing the place. I've never seen her before, and I know everyone in this community. She's obviously some troubled teen looking to break in while the owners are gone. The officers exchanged skeptical, but highly cautious glances. The taller one, a calm woman named Officer Bennett, tried to de-escalate the situation. "Ma'am," she said gently, "she says she lives here. She even has a key." Linda scoffed loudly at the logical explanation. Of course she has a key. She probably stole it or had one made. "I've seen this on the news," Linda insisted. These kids case neighborhoods, wait for the right moment, and then they finally strike. I'm telling you, I prevented a burglary. You should be thanking me. That was the exact moment I finally stepped outside. "Is there a problem here, officers?" I asked calmly, walking down the porch steps. Linda's face lit up like she had been waiting for an audience. "Judge Whitmore, thank goodness you're home. I just caught this girl trying to break into your house. Don't worry, I called 911 right away." I walked down the rest of the steps slowly, pulling my wallet from my pocket. "That won't be necessary, officers," I said, handing them my ID. "This is my daughter, Madison. She's here for her visitation weekend. Officer Bennett took my license and judicial ID. I could see her demeanor shift immediately. Her partner, a younger officer named Gallagher, stepped back slightly in clear and respectful recognition. They both knew me well. I had presided over more than a few of their department's cases. "Judge Whitmore," Officer Bennett said formally, "our apologies for the confusion. We received a report of a possible break-in." And just like that, Linda's confidence started to crack. "Wait, what? No, that can't be right," she sputtered nervously. "I've never seen this girl before. She can't possibly be your daughter." "Miss Carmichael," I interrupted, my voice carrying the same heavy weight it does in my courtroom. "This is my daughter, Madison. She has been visiting me every other weekend for 3 solid years. If you've never noticed her, it says a lot more about your attention span than her right to be here." Linda's face went completely red. Well, how was I supposed to know? She defended herself weakly. "She was acting suspiciously, walking around the back of the house," Linda argued. "The back?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You mean the paved path from the street leading straight to the front door? The one she always uses because the side gate is locked." Madison finally managed to speak, though her voice still trembled slightly. "I tried to tell her, Dad, I said I was your daughter, but she just yelled at me to get off the property. And then she called the cops." Officer Gallagher was already jotting notes in his pad. "Miss Carmichael," he asked, looking up with a serious expression, "did this young lady identify herself to you before you called 911? Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Well, she might have said something," she stammered defensively, "but I didn't believe her. Anyone could claim to be someone's daughter. I was just being cautious." "You can't be too careful these days." Officer Bennett's voice was remarkably calm but incredibly firm. "Actually, Ms. Carmichael, you can be too careful. Filing a false police report is a crime." I stared at Linda. "You called 911 to report a burglary in progress," I said, my tone sharp and cutting, "when what you actually saw was a teenager entering her father's home with full permission." Linda protested it wasn't false. I genuinely believed her tone had completely lost its earlier bravado. "You genuinely believed," I interrupted sharply, "that harassment could be mistaken for civic duty? Tell me, Ms. Carmichael, how many other residents' children have you unnecessarily called the police on? How many innocent visitors have you terrorized with your little vigilante routine?" The officers exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear this wasn't their first encounter with Linda's misguided crusades. Officer Gallagher flipped through his notepad. "Actually, Judge Whitmore," he said carefully, "we've responded to several calls from Ms. Carmichael over the past year. Most turned out to be false alarms." Linda's face twitched anxiously. "I'm just trying to keep this neighborhood safe," she insisted. But her voice faltered and her arms dropped limply to her sides. "No," I corrected her immediately. "You're trying to control this neighborhood. There's a massive difference, and today you crossed a line. You didn't just harass a visitor. You traumatized a minor. My minor. My own daughter." Officer Bennett stepped forward, her tone now strictly professional. "Ms. Carmichael, I am issuing a formal warning for the misuse of emergency services. This incident will be completely documented. If there is a pattern of false reports, you could easily face criminal charges." Linda's complexion went from red to pale. "You can't do that. I'm the HOA president. I have a responsibility." "Your responsibility," I interrupted, my voice cold and measured, "is to manage the common areas and enforce actual HOA bylaws. Nowhere in those bylaws does it grant you the authority to play police, and I should know. I reviewed them thoroughly before buying this house." I turned to the police. "Officers, I will be filing formal complaints not just with your department, but with the HOA board. This behavior needs to be addressed officially and immediately." Officer Bennett nodded respectfully. "That is your right, Your Honor." She then turned back to Linda with a very stern expression. "Ma'am, I suggest you educate yourself on what constitutes an actual emergency. Wasting police resources is a serious offense. As the officers returned to their cars, Linda stood completely frozen. She was bathed in the red glow of their taillights. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered during the commotion. As they began to disperse, I caught more than a few satisfied smirks and approving nods. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had enough of Linda's tyranny. "This isn't over," Linda finally managed to sputter out. "I will be addressing this at the very next board meeting. Your daughter may be allowed to visit, but there are procedures. Guest registrations. Proper notifications." I casually pulled out my phone. "Qui," I said. "Let's discuss it right now. I believe I have board member Eleanor Brooks on speed dial. She's an attorney, you know. I'm sure she would love to hear how the HOA president called the cops on a resident's child." Linda's eyes went wide with panic as I scrolled through my contacts. "That's not necessary," she stammered quickly. "We can handle this internally." I found Eleanor's number and smiled at her. "I think it's very necessary," I replied. "You see, Ms. Carmichael, you've been operating under the illusion that your title gives you unlimited authority. But every system has checks and balances. The next few weeks were extremely interesting." True to my word, I filed formal complaints with both the police department and the HOA board. Word spread through Pine Valley like wild, untamed wildfire. Linda Carmichael, the almighty HOA president, had called the cops on Judge Whitmore's daughter. The woman who had spent years flaunting her influence had just alienated a respected legal figure. 2 weeks later, the board called an emergency meeting. The community clubhouse was packed. Every single seat was filled, with residents lining the walls and murmuring in eager, restless anticipation. One by one, the neighbors stood to speak. It became painfully clear that Linda's reign of fear had been long overdue for an end. Mr. Higgins, an elderly widower, was the first to take the floor. He explained how he had been fined because his grandson's bike sat in his driveway for 10 minutes. Then came the Collins family. They shared how Linda called the police on their family reunion. She had claimed their gathering was an unauthorized event. Even quiet Mrs. Dawson stood up. Her hands trembled as she recounted being ruthlessly harassed over the specific color of her flower bed. Linda sat at the board table, shrinking further with every testimony. Her once commanding posture had crumbled into something small, fragile even. When the time came for the vote of no confidence, the result was absolutely unanimous. Not a single person raised a hand in her defense. Even her former allies on the board couldn't justify her ridiculous and harmful actions anymore. But the fallout didn't end there. After reviewing her long history of false reports, the county prosecutor's office decided to press official charges for the misuse of emergency services. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who couldn't stop calling the police was now being summoned by them. The morning of her arraignment, I saw her in the courthouse hallway looking defeated. She looked like a shell of the woman she once was. Her hair was unkempt, and her confident, smug smile was entirely gone. Her attorney was a nervous young man who clearly regretted taking the case. He was speaking to her in hushed tones. 50 hours of community service, I overheard him saying, and a $5,000 fine. You'll also be barred from holding any HOA leadership position for 5 years. Linda's face completely crumpled. $5,000. 5 years in exile from her self-made kingdom. Our eyes met for a brief, heavy moment as I confidently walked past her in the hallway. I could have said something sharp, something deeply satisfying, but I didn't need to. The law had already done exactly what it was designed to do. Justice doesn't always roar to make its presence known. Sometimes it simply arrives, quietly and decisively. That morning, Linda Carmichael pleaded no contest. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she accepted the heavy sentence handed down to her. When the judge read her punishment aloud, her shoulders sank. Community service, the massive fine, and the leadership ban. 5 long years of total silence from her dictatorial, overbearing rule. And for the first time in a very long while, Pine Valley Estates finally felt peaceful again. The neighborhood could finally breathe without the constant looming fear of always being watched.